Hi everyone, welcome to Lisa's Stamp Studio. My name is Lisa Curcio. I'm going to be using the Lilypad Lake Bundle today to create a beautiful nautical card. This red, white, and blue theme is synonymous with summer, and these sailboats are going to be great to create all types of cards, including masculine cards. The multiple layers on this card are actually very easy to create. Let's head over to the stamp table and let's get started on today's project. Here's a good close-up of that nautical card we're going to be creating today. The great thing about this stamp set is there are other greetings inside of it, so you can change up the theme. I'm using the images in this set to create some real interesting background and textured pieces. I'm going to start with a piece of Night of Navy cardstock. You're going to be able to find all the cutting dimensions and the pictures down in the description bar below of this video if you're here visiting from YouTube. When I saw the Lilypad Lake stamp set, I saw this circle, which I knew was supposed to be a sun or a sunset. But I thought, you know what? I think that's going to make a really fun open circle background, and that's what I decided to use on my card today. I'm going to be using the Whisper White Craft ink. This is a pigmented ink, and you're going to find that it's got a different type of surface to it versus the regular classic ink pads. It's a bit softer, so you're going to want to tap gently when you go to ink up your stamp. I'd like to check to make sure that I don't have ink around the outside circumference, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to stamp to create a little bit of a wallpaper type background. So you'll see me stamping on and off the cardstock so that it looks more like patterned paper than it does a stamped image. That's going to need time to dry, so I'm going to set that aside, which is why I've done it first. I'm moving over to a strip of Whisper White cardstock where I'm actually going to stamp a patterned background. I'm going to be using two colors. I have Real Red, and I also have Night of Navy. And I'm going to alternate these, which does mean I'm going to have to clean the stamp in between. But that's okay, I've got my Stampin' Scrub right off camera. One side has Stampin' Mist on it, and the other side is dry, very much like doing the dishes for your stamps. I've gone ahead and I've mounted this squiggly line image, which could be reminiscent of waves. And I'm going to start with the Real Red, and I'm just going to ink that up. Now, I'm not going to need the whole thing because obviously this is a narrow piece of cardstock. But I'm going to start here at the top and I'm going to stamp. Now, I'm going to clean my stamp off, but I'm going to give you a tip. On your scratch paper, go ahead and stamp off the excess ink. By doing this, you're actually reducing the coverage here, which means you're going to have to make less trips to the sink to rinse out your Stampin' Scrub, especially as much as we're going to be changing colors today. I'm switching over to the Night of Navy now, and I'm going to fill in underneath the red. Again, tapping off the color. I'm going to repeat this process now all the way down. I flipped the scratch paper over so it wouldn't be so distracting, but you can see how we've got that graduation of color. If you overstamp a red into a blue, it's totally fine because a lot of this is going to be covered up in the center by the banner as well. I cut this piece longer than I'm going to need, and I'll give you a tip on why I did that in just a minute. I want to create a banner for this card that's going to house our sailboats. So I've brought out the triple banner punch. I'm absolutely loving this. You don't have to cut your banner tips by hand any longer if you have a 1 inch, a 1.5, or a 2-inch wide piece of cardstock. So I'm going to go ahead and slide this up that track, making sure it's all the way to the back, and with the palm of my hand, I'm going to press, and that's going to give me that perfect banner tip. I also have a scrap piece of cardstock here of Whisper White, and this is where I'm going to stamp my image. I've got a scrap piece of Whisper White cardstock and my Memento ink. I've pulled out the sailboat image, so I'm going to go ahead and ink that up. And I'm going to stamp that right here in the center, and I'm going to use the framelits that are part of this bundle to cut those out. I'm not concerned about that little oops right there because the die actually cuts around that. Just another tip for you, if you're like me and you got a little bit zealous, you're going to see that I've got a little bit of excess ink on the edges from rocking it in the ink pad. So one thing you might see me do a lot is ink it and then check, because if I do have it there, I can actually remove it before I stamp my regular cardstock. I've chosen 3 markers. I have the Real Red, the Night of Navy, which are reminiscent to the ink pads that we used, and I also have the Crumb Cake to color in this image. I'm going to be using the brush end of my marker for the larger areas and the fine point or the pen side to do those real narrow areas. Now that I have those colored, I'm going to go ahead and die cut those. These are the lakeside framelits, and you're going to see that they're actually going to cut out the images that are part of that stamp set I just showed you. In addition to that, it's got some extra pieces in here. You've got a little bit of seagrass, and of course you've got labels here to choose from. So I'm going to pull out the sailboat die from this bundle. I'm going to line that here. I've got a clear mat on the bottom to protect it, and I'm going to put another clear mat over the top, and then I'm going to crank this through. Any popping and cracking that you hear is completely normal from the rollers in the Big Shot. And you can see that this is going to cut out this image perfectly. The great thing about this die too is if you decide you only want one or just the pair of sailboats, you're actually able to use them independently. Now while I have the Big Shot out, I'm going to go ahead and do some embossing as well. So I'm going to switch out my platforms to the regular basic Big Shot platform. I'm going to place a clear mat on the bottom again to protect it, and I've cut myself a small piece of real red cardstock that I'm going to use as a border as the top of the banner. I'm placing this inside this simple striped embossing folder. I'm going to try to get those stripes even, and I'm going to place that here and then cover it up again. This is a 6x6 embossing folder, so it's really important that your embossing folder is lined up directly on the edges of the Big Shot, because you wouldn't want to chew off those edges as you're cranking it through. So we've got a little bit of an embossed edge here for the top of our banner. I've got my banner here, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp the greeting. And I'm going to use the congratulations that we used on the original sample. And I'm going to stamp that down here near the bottom of the banner. Now, it's a tight fit, so I'm looking the very best that I can to get it in there. This is where I'm going to mount those little sailboats. And because they're small, I'm going to use mini dimensionals. So I'm going to flip those over. I'm going to bring in my silicone craft sheet because I think you're going to be able to see things a little bit better on there since we don't have a white on white background. I like to use my paper piercing tool to help me pick them up because they are small. And then I'm going to go ahead and place several on the back here. Very much like the large dimensionals, they also have a paper backing that's going to need to be removed. You're going to find two here at the tips. That one whole dimensional may be really tight to fit inside of there, so I want to give you a tip. While the dimensionals are on the actual paper, go ahead and take your scissors and cut them up the center. That's going to give you a smaller piece that's going to work really well for those little tiny areas. And again, I like to use my paper piercing tool to help me lift those up and get those where I want them. Now we're going to take off that paper backing. And again, like I said, they are tiny. So if you're having trouble, again, you can use your paper piercing tool. So you can kind of just go ahead and loosen that with the tool by removing that paper backing. I have my banner here, and we're going to go ahead and position those sailboats. I'm going to place my pair here, and the single one I'm going to tuck just a little bit behind it and a little bit further down. So we've got that there. Remember this piece that we embossed? That's going to go here at the top of the banner. So I'm going to flip that over, and I'm going to place adhesive on the back. This is another reason why I absolutely love my silicone craft sheet. Adhesive will not stick to it. It simply rubs right off. It works well with glue and even hot glue. So that's going to keep my work surface nice and clean. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to line this up at the top and along the sides. I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to rub from the back and burnish that down so that it'll stick well. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of twine to this. So I'm going to use some linen thread because it's nice and thin and it won't impede on the area of my design. And I'm going to wrap it around this area to create a border several times. When I'm satisfied where I have it, I'm going to go ahead and I am going to create a knot. Because linen thread is very thin, I find that by making the knot first, I have less opportunity of it coming unraveled when I go to make my single loop bow for this. To make the single loop bow, it's very much like making a regular bow, except you're going to pull the second strand all the way through. So I've got my first loop here, and just like you would a bow, how you would bring this one through and stop, instead you're going to pull it all the way through and then pull tightly. And then you're able to adjust that loop very easily. Just press on that knot, and then pull the strand till it gets to be the size that you want. And then I'm going to go ahead and take my paper snips, and I'm going to give that a little bit of a haircut because it's a little bit long for my liking. Do you remember this border that we stamped? We're going to add a little bit of a white strip here to create another interesting edge. This is completely optional, but I found it stood out quite nicely on the Night of Navy background. So I'm going to place some adhesive along the outside edge here. And then I'm going to line this up just to leave myself a little bit of a border. And then with my scissors, now I keep a pair in my stamp studio that have red ribbon on them, and I like to use these when something is sticky. It'll keep my nice paper snips nice and clean. I'm using the edge of this as a guide to cut off any excess that I need, and I prefer to leave it long. This way I can make sure that I'm not a little bit short on either end. I cut another small strip. That's going to go here across the upper portion of that card. So I'm going to place a little adhesive on the back. Again, if you're here viewing from YouTube, you're going to be able to find the cutting dimensions in the description bar below in this video. So I'm going to go ahead and adhere that here. And just like we did before, I'm going to come from the back and I'm going to trim off any of that excess. This border piece is going to go here as well, so I'm going to add more adhesive here. And just like I've done before, this is a little bit longer than what we're going to need. So I'm going to leave a little margin here off to the side. And with those same scissors, I'm going to cut from the back using that Night of Navy cardstock as a guide so that those edges are going to be nice and straight. I have a piece of Whisper White cardstock here. I've gone ahead and I've scored that just before the video. I'm going to use my bone folder to go over that crease for that nice crisp edge. This piece is going to get mounted on the base of the card, and then I'm going to mount that here on the white cardstock, leaving a little bit of a border all the way around. Remember our banner? Well, now we're going to go ahead and mount it. I'm going to switch over now to my regular size dimensionals. I'm going to flip that over. I'm going to add a little bit of lift to the back of this piece. And then this is going to get set right over the top of that strip. I created a little bit offset for some interest. Here's the card we created today, the one I created before you joined me. See, I'm a little bit higher here than I was on my original card, but you know what? I actually like that. It comes up on top of that border, which is really pretty. Great masculine card. If you don't already have a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator and you are interested in obtaining the new catalog, I would be more than happy to send you a complimentary copy. Just leave me a comment below. Thanks so much for joining me, everyone. I look forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day.